So in this video, I'm going to address that ginormous elephant in the room that is the missing hard drive. Now, obviously, there is more than enough evidence off Stearns' phone and off his Google Drive to put him away forever. So on one hand, this missing hard drive is somewhat irrelevant to the case. They don't need any more evidence in terms of images and that. So that's actually not the reason that I'm looking at it today. The reason I'm looking at it today is because of what it actually means in terms of Stearns' parents. Because we had this recent interview where they came on the Hidden True Crime channel, and yes, I feel sorry for them over what they're going through with their son, and I've done a video about that. It must be utterly nightmarish what they are going through right now. But they did enable their son. And to me, right from the very beginning, there was something about the way that Christopher Stearns spoke that just kind of put up red flags for me. And originally I wasn't sure what it was. But the more I thought about it, the more I realised that he basically gives long explanations for everything, which is what you would expect from someone who is trying to hide something, someone who is being untruthful. And admittedly, I tried to give him the benefit of the doubt. And maybe I am being a little bit unfair. But when I look at the bigger picture, there are things that to me are a red flag. So in this video, the major red flags all are, or the ones that I'm going to talk about, are the ones which relate to Stephen Stearns' middle of the night visit down to Northport. And my questions over this as to, did his parents know that he was heading down there? And I keep coming back to the question, is it possible that before Chris Stearns drove to Orlando or Kissimmee or wherever it was to put them up in a hotel for the night, is it possible that he thought something was going on, that perhaps Stephen had told him some kind of story and he thought he was going there to protect his son from getting into trouble, but wasn't fully aware of exactly what was going down, so that in some way he was actually trying to cover up for his son. He just didn't know what he was covering up for. It's a possibility that I keep running over in my head, and I'm going to play a number of clips throughout this video which point to the fact that it could actually be quite possible. So, working chronologically, the first video that I want to look at is when Christopher Stearns is talking about phone calls from his son during the day that Maddie went missing.
When he called me that afternoon, second call that day, flat tire, and listened to that BS. And boy, when you look at the images of that tire, I mean, there wasn't there hardly any rubber left on that wheel whatsoever. And then they show pictures of these chunks of rubber laying in the ground. And Stephen trying to explain to me that he had a flat tire and he was in the inside lane of a highway in a high density commercial district and he couldn't pull off the road. Again, it was a story that I didn't believe. And then getting a call 90 minutes later, less than 90 minutes later, about Maddie's disappearance. And I go, that's too coincidental. Two events like that in a single afternoon. I don't believe in coincidences. didn't believe that, but wanted to.
Now, I can't decide whether it is some form of leakage or whether it was just him misspoke. But when he talked about Stefan ringing him about the flat tyre, he says that was the second phone call for the day. He then goes on to talk about the phone call after they discovered that Maddie was missing. But I find it interesting that he did refer to the flat tyre phone call as the second phone call for the day, because by all accounts, Stefan was all over the place through the day. So did he ring his father earlier in the day, and if so, why? I'm thinking perhaps he's just misspoke, and that he means that that was one of two phone calls, and he means second as in the other one was the phone call later in the day. But when you hear someone refer to a phone call as that is the second phone call from them, then immediately you think that there was a phone call beforehand. When I got the phone call about the tyre, the second one for the day, something is not right with that. And from the get-go, I questioned why he saw a flat tyre as being a red flag. People have flat tyres. And surely, I mean, if you're driving on a highway, it can take, if someone's had a flat tyre before and they've changed the tyre and left debris on the road, that might be all it takes. You only need one nail to get a flat tyre. Sometimes those nails can take a bit of time before they cause a flat tyre. So I don't understand why he saw the flat tyre as being a red flag, unless this was him creating some sort of narrative that tried to make him look less involved or something. I'm really not sure. But anyway, that is not a huge issue in terms of this whole trip down to Northport and the missing hard drive. But it is something that concerns me because it makes me think that Chris Stearns is not being entirely honest in these interviews.
I was there to support the story until it was different. And unfortunately, I found out a couple of days later, if I had seen that TV interview that they held the next day, my attitude and demeanor with him would have been considerably different than me making the trip to Orlando and helping he and Maddie out, or Jennifer out.
So this perked my ears up immediately. I was there to support the story until it was different. So, what story was he actually referring to? To me, this encapsulates the whole thing. I honestly believe that Chris Stearns did go to Northport for a reason. I believe that Stearns did feed him some sort of bullshit story, and Chris Stearns thought he was going there to get his son out of trouble, but he didn't realise the extent of the trouble that his son was in. And later on realised that he made a huge mistake in supporting his son. Because things that he says make me think that he was taking some actions to help his son. Now, my big question here is, do you really need to drive in the middle of the night to book someone into a hotel? Can't you do it over the phone? Can't you make a booking online? Can't you pay for it online? Because in Australia you can. And there is one point in one of the many, many interviews where he actually says that Jen and Stefan paid for themselves, but he paid for the dog, which was a really odd thing to say. In another interview, Jennifer Stearns said that he came and paid for them because she couldn't afford a hotel room. So there's inconsistencies here over who paid for the hotel room. Why are there inconsistencies unless someone is trying to hide something? Did he go to Jen and Stefan to help them with something? Is there a reason that he drives up to get them into a hotel room, and then his son, after he's arrived, drives down to Northport through the night? To me, that was hugely coincidental. And the thing is, one of the major irregularities in his narrative, this is a guy who, when you listen to the interviews, he gives really specific times for things. He says to them in one of the interviews, I made notes, I made a timeline. Here are the exact times based on my phone. So he has been really, really precise with his timeline. And yet when it comes to him driving from Northport to Kissimmee or wherever the hotel was, it's really vague and the times change. He says he left a little bit after midnight, and that fits with the interview with Jen Stearns, because the interview with her finished at 12:10, meaning that that's when she knew that she couldn't go back to the townhouse. So if that is when she rang Christopher Stearns, then it would make sense that that would be when he left the house. But then he is kind of vague in terms of travel times and stuff. He says roughly 2.5 hours, but then at one stage he said he arrived at 3 o'clock in the morning. And another time he talks about how he only had 35 minutes with Jen and Stefan between 2:15 a.m. and 4 in the afternoon. So he's giving different times. So I'll just play those for you.
How long does it take you to get from Orlando to there?
Well, with no traffic out last night, 2.5 hours.
Okay.
But if you're dealing with traffic early this morning, you're going to be looking at close to 3.
Yeah.
But the amount of time that I had from 2:15 Wednesday morning until 4 p.m., I spent a total of 35 minutes with them, and it was over 3 different occasions.
So, what time did you get here last night?
3 a.m.
3 a.m. When you got here, where did you meet your son and Jennifer?
We apparently pulled up at the same time at the hotel.
Perfect. Okay. When you guys got there, what did you guys end up doing?
We checked into the rooms. They had 239, I had 203. Opposite ends of the building. I brought my stuff up, went over and said goodnight, and then hit the sack.
So after Chris Stearns arrived at the hotel, we know that Stefan Stearns took Jen Soto's car down to Northport. And we have police saying, well, we've got the car on dash cam because there was an accident less than a mile from the house. So they have footage of Jen's car less than a mile from the house. And there's also vagueness over the storage unit. In these interviews, it hasn't been fully clarified. They go back and forth about possible access to the storage unit. But the thing that I find interesting is, first of all, the discussion of the car being near the house, but also the discussion about the keys for the storage unit. Because the thing that I think a few people missed is that when they first discussed the storage unit, Christopher Stearns mentions that he keeps a key in the console in his car, and then he refers to a key that is kept in a basket at their house. And the conversation continues where the police officers actually ask him to check with Deb Stearns if the key is still in the basket. Now, we don't get any kind of answer over that. The next part of the conversation with the keys goes to Chris Stearns suddenly saying, well, yeah, there was a second key, but it's been missing for over a year. So suddenly the story has changed, and nobody seems to have picked up on that. 1 minute he's talking about the key being in a basket at their house, and then suddenly he's saying, no, I haven't seen it in over a year, it's been gone for a year, and Stefan's maybe got it. Now, to me, that seemed really, really odd. And I was surprised that maybe the police officers did pick up on it, and maybe they chose not to comment on it. Because if these were detectives talking to him at the time, these guys can be really astute sometimes. And if someone says a lie to them, sometimes they won't call them out on it, but they'll let them continue with the lie. But I'm going to play the audio where they discuss the keys so you can hear all this for yourself.
We have the car leaving the hotel going to Northport, and then the car down to Northport as well.
What time did he leave the hotel? Did he go to Northport?
I don't remember exactly.
And I wonder, and because Jennifer called me, as I shared with you, I thought around 9:45, asked me if I knew what Stefan was.
That's when he was on his way back.
Yeah. And I don't know if that was just, she was playing me with that, knowing that he left and went down there. But again, can't figure out why he went down to Northport, because by the time he would have arrived, would have put him at past 6 o'clock. And
Well, we know exactly what time he was. Once again, I don't remember what time it was, but we can put him within less than a mile from your house through dash cam video from Northport PD that was working a crash. Showed him in the car at that point. So we know exactly what time he was there. But what time he came back, I don't remember what time it was.
okay. Did you ever confirm that he went to the storage unit?
The records from the storage unit were kind of wishy-washy.
Yeah.
You know, it looked like somebody used your access code, but when we talked to him again, they said the dates and times they may have been mistaken. So whether he was there or not, I don't know.
Yeah.
You may have noticed, now that particular audio there was from the interview that Chris Stearns requested in July of this year, so it was a later interview. And if you've watched that interview, you may have noticed that the officer who he was talking to quite often was vague with details. So Chris Stearns was trying to find out times in terms of exactly when his son was at Northport, and they basically essentially brush him off and say, yeah, we know the time because we've got it on dash cam. And then again, he's fishing for times, etc. When he brings up the storage unit, he gets a really wishy-washy response. So the officer is saying, well, we don't know for certain if he was there or not. So to me, the responses that the officers are giving to Chris Stearns tell me that they don't necessarily trust him. They're seeing red flags in what he's saying and in the way that he's fishing for answers as well. And so they are not giving him some direct answers. Because I think we can be pretty confident, given how hard they worked this case, that they would know for certain whether or not Stefan Stearns did go to that storage unit. But for some reason or other, they're choosing not to disclose that to Chris Stearns. That's my take on it.
But there's a storage unit, but he wouldn't have access to the keys to the storage unit because I have the only key to it. And that would have been locked in my car, and he would have had to come in my room, which he didn't have a key to get into it.
Can she check and make sure the key's there?
What car? Well, is the key in the basket? Well, go look at the key in the basket.
The key in the console is in this car that you're driving up?
Hang on a second. What?
You said the key in the console is in this
My car? Yeah, it's only one key.
This car out here?
Yeah. Do I need to go look?
Yeah, let's go see if it's in there.
Yes, so she can look for the key in the house, we can look for the key in the car.
So he definitely flip-flopped between referring to keys, plural, and one key. And he talked about the key in the basket. And even to the point where apparently Deb was meant to go and check for the key in the basket. But before that, it's interesting the way he essentially coached her over the phone with, "I've got the only key." And then it gets brought up about the key in the basket. So I can't help wondering what's going on here. Because either there was meant to be a key in a basket at the house, which has been removed sometime quite recently, because obviously they expect it to be there, or the alternate story, the key's been missing for over a year. But only one of those stories can be true. And yet he's presented both those stories in the one interview, and that concerns me a lot. Now, in terms of Stephen Stearns actually going to the house at Northport, there's a number of things which to me are red flags and make me think that he did, well, I can say with quite certainty that either he went to that house or one of his parents acted to cover up for him. And I'll get to that point shortly. But first of all, I want to talk about these coincidences in terms of him going down to the house and discrepancies. Ironically, it's Chris Stearns who talks about how, two things in a row, two coincidences in a row are a red flag. And yet, he talks about how when he left, the keypad for the front door was flashing. So he told his wife not to use that front door. Basically, he was saying to detectives the keypad wasn't working, so the front door wasn't usable. And then, when they ask him about Ring cameras, he says, "Oh no, I took the modem out for them because we've changed providers. So they're not actually hooked up to the internet right now. The modem for that is sitting in my office." Two interesting coincidences, because that would mean that Stephen Stearns could not have gotten in through the front of the house. He mentions that to get in through the garage you need a clicker, and that Stearns didn't have a clicker. And then when they ask about the property being a gated property, he says, "It's not a gated property, but the backyard is." And I'm going to show you some images of the gates for the backyard of that property shortly to show you that, well, it's not gated in the sense that there is a security guard to stop people getting in. There are gates. It doesn't even look like those gates are lockable. So to me that says that there would have been ready access for Stearns through the back door of the house. And here's the other kicker. Major discrepancy. At one point in time, when originally the whole topic of him heading down to Northport is brought up, he says, well, the dogs went on alert at 3:19. He gives a really specific time. And he says, so that couldn't have been Stefan because he would have still been up here. But then, in this later interview, he says it was about 5:15, which would actually fit with the timeline of Stefan going to the house. Now, we've seen Deb Stearns become emotional a number of times. And one of those times is when Chris Stearns says to her, well, they believe that Stefan went down to the house last night. And she gets all emotional about it and says, I don't know what would have happened had he got into the house. And she swears a bit and everything like that. And when you first listen to that interview, yeah, it's convincing. She's worried about what might happen had he got into the house. But when you stop and think about it logically, that is not a logical response at all. He was living with them. Why would she be concerned about him coming into the house when he was there with them 24/7 just about? He had only left at apparently 3 p.m. the day before. She wouldn't have been concerned about him being up at night in the house because they claim that he doesn't sleep. So why would she have this reaction about him getting into the house? And why would she be like, oh, what could have happened had he got into the house? Either she knows that he did something to Maddie and she's suddenly scared of her son, or she's basically putting on an act to try and cover for the fact that she knows that he did enter the house. Because it's just not a logical reaction. And I'm going to play you that because to me it is a huge red flag.
Just that motherfucker, you know what stopped him from getting in the house? He didn't have a garage door opener. The front door lock is not working well.
Yep.
And I had put the lock on the slider.
Okay.
He couldn't get in.
All right. So well.
Okay, so we have this narrative that the front door wasn't working properly because of the keypad. She's saying she put the slider on the lock for that door, and that he couldn't get in through the garage. There's no mention of the back door at all. But here's the thing. We have Chris Stearns later on taking a computer to the police, handing it over and saying, this is the computer that he was using the day before or during the morning before he went up to see Jen and Maddie. And yet, when they opened it up, there was no hard drive in it. And he had then claimed that he found this hard drive in the storage unit. But they discovered that that's not the same hard drive. It hadn't been used since 2020. And he's like, the conversation is, well, how did he get it all the way back there? To me, it just seems like that's probably been in there for 4 years anyway. And perhaps he knew it was there and he accessed it anyway. But here's the thing. Somebody removed the hard drive from that computer. The computer that Christopher Stearns handed over to police. They are claiming that Stefan Stearns didn't get into the house. You have police saying we know that he was at least within a mile of that house on that morning. They're claiming that he couldn't get in because of the door pad and the clicker on the garage. They talk about the dogs being on alert at 3:15, but then the story changes to 5:15. And they claim that, well, the backyard was gated, inferring that he couldn't get in through the backyard and the back door. So I'm going to show you some images now to finish off this video that show you just how easily it would have been for Stephen Stearns, to have gone into that house that morning. And my concerns are that his parents seem to be lying about his ability to get into that house. And I wonder if they knew that he did go to the house. I wonder if Chris Stearns specifically went and met Jen and Stephen to hand over something, to hand over a backdoor key, or to hand over the key that was supposed to be in the basket for the storage unit. To me, it seems that somehow Stearns has gone to the house. He has removed that hard drive. And I don't believe that Chris Stearns would have done that had he known that his son was responsible for Maddie's death. I think he probably thought he was rescuing his son from some other misdemeanor, because his son always screwed up and they always rescued him. But let's have a quick look at some images. Now, I have been very careful not to show the entirety of the house, because that's not necessary, and, well, it's not entirely fair. But I do want to show you the gates and the location of some of the cameras, because that is important. First of all, going back to Chris Stearns' description of the location of the house, you can see here, now he said, well, you know, by 7:40 in the morning you'd have vehicles going up and down because of building in the area. But you can look at how very isolated it is. And here's the thing. The red dot is where his house is. The blurring is where the address is blurred out. As he said, you have an empty block on one side of the house. You have a new house on the other side. Nothing over the other side of the road. And you have this track. So the blue line, if you're familiar with Google Images, that is the road out the front of their house. But you can see that directly behind their house is what is essentially a track. And you can access that track from between two lots of trees. He could have quite easily parked on that track behind their house, or even parked on, there's plenty of spots there where he could have parked the car and it would have been inconspicuous. But he certainly could have easily put the car somewhere where it wouldn't necessarily be spotted by someone driving past. But at the same time, who's going to notice a car parked there regardless? If it's just parked on the road, nobody's going to notice it. Now, let's move on to the gates. There are gates like this either side of the house. This gate is on the side where there is actually a house next door. Now, if you look at the latch on that gate, it doesn't look like you could actually lock that gate. It looks like you would just turn the handle and open it. There's certainly no lock there, so it would have to be a padlock. But even still, you could jump that gate. They say that Stearns ran track and he was quite athletic. He could have jumped that gate easily. He wouldn't have jumped that gate or gone through that gate though, because that is on the side of the other house. And you can also see that light, which I suspect is also a ring camera, There were 3 of them. There were 2 in front of the front door, which I'm not going to show you because that would mean that I'm showing you the house. But there's also this one on that corner of the house. However, when you go to the other corner of the house, the story is different. 2 things that are apparent here. First of all, that gate, that's on the side of the bush. So the empty lot, which is all trees. Also, if you look at the house, you can see there's no camera on that side of the house. And that fence and that gate is set back a bit from the front of the house. You could access that gate from behind the property, because if you look to the left of all that, you can see that there is a bit of a path alongside the fence, which would go to that rough road that I showed you that is directly behind their house. So all it would take would be for him to park behind the house, go along that path, and go through the gate. Or if the gate was locked, just jump the fence anywhere. It wasn't gated, as in there was no security guard. And of course, there's no camera footage because, for starters, the cameras had been disconnected. But also, even if the cameras had been connected, he could have easily gone through that gate without coming up on camera. So you have Stearns going down to the house at Northport, and conveniently, the keypad to the front door is disarmed, and the ring cams are disarmed. And you have these gates that would be really easy to get through. You have easy access to this property. And you have Deb Stearns overreacting over the possibility of him maybe getting into the house when he actually lives there. Why would she need to react like that? It makes no sense whatsoever to me. So this makes me question whether or not they were trying to help him out. Maybe, I don't know what kind of BS story he might have given them for them to think that he needed to get down to the house to remove something from the house. Because, like I said, while these people do come across as being a bit laundry-like, Chris and Roberta Laundry, you still want to believe the best of people and think that they're not going to protect their son if they know that he has all these images, and if they know that he's done what he did to Maddie. But I am going to finish by pointing out one more thing. In the interview before the officers have told Christopher Stearns that his son has been arrested because of all the images, they have said a number of times during that interview that they believed that Maddie was still alive and they were trying to locate her. And yet there's at least 2 instances where Chris Stearns talks about a body. One of those being, he talks about the storage unit being super crowded, but that I guess you could hide a body in there. Why is he talking about a body when police are still saying, we think she's missing, we think she's still alive? So there's so many red flags here with the Stearnses, which I find rather concerning. And the way that Chris Stearns, like his son, tells really long stories, when short answers would suffice. I think there is definitely some kind of deception going on here. I don't know what they knew about their son's actions, But I believe that they knew something and that they did originally try and cover up for him. You even have Chris Stearns saying that, you know, we believed the original story or whatever it was, and I wouldn't have gone to the hotel had I realised. So to me that is saying that he knew something. His son had rang him and told him some sort of story, and he thought he was covering up for something, but not for what actually happened. Let me know your thoughts on this below. Thanks for listening. If you're new, please subscribe. Also hit the like button.